Let me ask you something. When was the last time you did something actually genuinely dangerous? And I don't mean I ate sushi from a gas station dangerous. I mean I'm gonna climb into a metal tube held together by spit and prayer and fly it over a giant bucket of salt water dangerous. We live in a world now where people need a trigger warning before they read a menu. We have helmets for everything. Ride a bike on the sidewalk at 2 miles per hour? Strap one on, along with a neon vest and padded shoes just in case your little toes get emotionally damaged. At that speed, a turtle with a hip replacement could overtake you, yet you're geared up like you're about to be launched out of a cannon into a brick wall. If you fall at 2 miles per hour, you don't need head protection. You need to accept that you're clumsy and move on with your life. And then you look back at someone like Amelia Earhart. This woman was operating in an era where safety features consisted of wearing a leather jacket so your skin didn't freeze to the seat. That was it. There was no check engine light. If the engine stopped, you just looked down and went, "Oh, I guess I'm a boat now." And she did it anyway. She did it because she had that internal motor, that thing in your gut that says, "I'd rather be a footnote in a history book than an employee of the month for the rest of my life." Amelia was born in Atchison, Kansas, back in 1897. And right out of the gate, she was a problem for the neighbors. While every other little girl was being taught how to sit still and look like a porcelain doll, Amelia was out there building a roller coaster in her backyard. She took a wooden box, some rollers, and a couple of planks, and she launched herself off the roof of a tool shed. She crashed, obviously. She came out bleeding, bruised, and probably with a mild concussion. And what did she say? She looked at her sister and said, "It's just like flying." Now, to be clear, this was not the era of padded playgrounds and liability waivers. This was the early 1900s. Kids weren't supervised so much as released into the wild and expected to survive on instinct. The fact that Amelia didn't just survive, but immediately wanted a sequel, tells you everything you need to know about how her brain was wired. See, that's the it factor. Most of us hit the ground and go, "I'm never doing that again. Where's my ice pack?" She hit the ground and went, "How do I go higher?" She wasn't even interested in planes at first. She saw one at a fair when she was 10 and called it a thing of rusty wire. Early airplanes were loud, fragile, and had about the structural integrity of a lawn chair in a hurricane. Honestly, her skepticism was reasonable. Of course, it's worth remembering that the airplane itself was practically brand new. The Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur, had invented the first powered, controllable flying machine just 14 years earlier in 1903. Amelia read about them and thought, okay, 2 guys built this contraption from scratch and got it to fly. Impressive. She admired their ingenuity, but she wasn't starry-eyed over anyone just because they were famous. Her obsession was always with what she could do in the air, not who had done it first. Later in life, she never met the Wrights personally, but their invention and persistence were a constant reminder that if 2 brothers could create a flying machine from scratch, the sky was open to anyone bold enough to try. What did interest her early on was doing things she wasn't supposed to do. She climbed trees, hunted rats with a rifle, and collected newspaper clippings about women who broke records or refused to behave properly, basically building a vision board for chaos. Even as a kid, she was quietly taking notes. Her family life also shaped this fearlessness. She had a supportive father who encouraged curiosity, and a sister, Muriel, who was her lifelong witness to mischief. Amelia's mother, though more cautious, sometimes let her take risks that most adults would have said were insane. By the time she was a teenager, she was experimenting with bicycles, motorcycles, and early automobiles. Basically, if it moved, she wanted to test its limits. It wasn't until she was 23, which back then made her basically a senior citizen, that she went to an air show in California. A guy named Frank Hawks took her up for 10 minutes. She was 200 feet in the air and she realized, okay, this is it. Everything else is a waste of time. And this wasn't a smooth luxury experience. Early flight felt less like soaring and more like being rattled around inside a lawnmower with delusions of grandeur. But to Amelia, it didn't matter. The noise, the vibration, the danger, those weren't bugs, those were features. She worked every job you can imagine to pay for flying lessons. She was a truck driver, a stenographer, a photographer. She didn't have a GoFundMe. She didn't have a wealthy dad writing checks. She was out there grinding just so she could spend her weekends in a rickety plane that smelled like burning oil and regret. And every dollar she earned went straight back into the sky, because from that moment on, flying wasn't a hobby. It was the only version of life that made sense to her. By 1928, she's a decent pilot, but nobody knows who she is. Then comes the call. Charles Lindbergh had just flown the Atlantic, and the world was obsessed. Some socialite wants to fund a woman to do it too. But the 1920s were, let's just say, different. This wasn't about equality. This was about optics. Aviation was new, terrifying, and wildly romanticized, and rich people were treating record-breaking flights the way tech billionaires treat space launches now. Half science, half ego, all headlines. If they were going to send a woman, she had to look the part. They pick Amelia, not because she's the best pilot, but because she looks like Lindbergh. They called her Lady Lindy. Tall, lean, same haircut, same vaguely haunted expression of someone who has stared directly into mechanical failure at altitude. The branding was perfect, the logic was insulting. But here's the kicker, they told her she couldn't actually touch the controls. They hired two guys, Stoltz and Gordon, to do the actual flying. And Amelia knew exactly what this meant. She wasn't being chosen as a pilot, she was being chosen as cargo with cheekbones. Still, she said yes. Not because she was naive, but because she was strategic. She understood something crucial. This flight wasn't the victory. It was the doorway. She sat in the back for 20 hours while they flew through fog and rain. No autopilot, no radar, no comforting digital displays. Just darkness, instruments, and the Atlantic doing its best to kill them. She kept a log. She stayed alert. She absorbed everything. If they went down, she wanted to know how. The conditions were brutal. The plane pitched and rolled constantly, and Stoltz and Gordon were dealing with primitive radio interference while Amelia tried to keep her nerves in check. She later admitted in interviews that she was terrified the whole flight, but that was exactly what she needed to learn. It was a masterclass in observing a flight without actually being in control, and she soaked up every second. When they landed in Wales, the press went nuts. They treated her like she'd just discovered fire, and she's standing there looking at these reporters like they're morons. She literally told the press, "I was just baggage, like a sack of potatoes." Can you imagine the honesty? Most people today would be on a podcast for 3 hours talking about their harrowing journey and how they manifested the landing. She was disgusted by it. She felt like a fraud, and that's what drove her. She didn't want the parade. She wanted the flight. And that single sentence, sack of potatoes, tells you everything about Amelia Earhart. She didn't want borrowed glory. She wanted earned altitude. 4 years later, she says, "All right, I'm done being baggage." And in May 20th, 1932, she takes off from Newfoundland in a bright red Lockheed Vega 5B. Now this plane, it's basically a flying cigar. It's tight, it's loud, and it's about as stable as a toddler on a sugar high. Most people would have turned around. But where are you going to turn? You're in the middle of the Atlantic. You've got two choices. Keep going or become fish food. She stayed awake for nearly 15 hours straight, fighting exhaustion while the engine vibrated like it was personally offended by existence. Every sound mattered. Every wobble could be the last one. And through all of it, she kept flying because turning back wasn't bravery. It was impossible. She landed in a cow pasture in Londonderry, Ireland. She climbs out of the cockpit, probably smelling like a gas station explosion, and a farmer walks up to her. He asks, "Have you come far?" And she just looks at him, probably with the biggest "are you kidding me" face in history, and says, "From America." That is the peak of human coolness. That's it. We've been downhill ever since. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic, and she did it with a broken clock and a leaky tank. And this time, no potatoes. After that, she's a superstar. She's everywhere. And this is the part where people say, "Oh, she sold out." No, she was smart. She knew that flying was expensive. Planes cost money. Fuel cost money. Repairing broken engines, replacing propellers, buying charts, attending air shows, money, lots of it. So she leaned into the branding. She had her own line of luggage. She had Amelia Earhart fashions, durable, simple clothes for women who actually wanted to move their arms. Practical, elegant, and built for adventure, not for fainting on a velvet chaise lounge. She was the aviation editor for Cosmopolitan. She wrote columns encouraging women to try flying, to explore, to move past society's arbitrary rules. She wasn't just selling products. She was selling possibility. She was basically the CEO of herself, running a one-woman empire that combined fashion, media, and the occasional life-threatening stunt. In 1931, Amelia married George Putnam, who was a publishing mogul. But she didn't become Mrs. Putnam. She wrote him a letter on their wedding day, basically saying, "Look, I'm not going to be your maid. I'm not going to stay home. And I'm not going to be faithful to some medieval code if I don't feel like it. We're partners, or we're nothing." She was setting boundaries before people even had words for it. And even as she navigated fame, she stayed grounded in her mission. She promoted the aviation industry, encouraged women to get into science and engineering, and served as a living proof that you can was always more important than you should. She gave speeches, signed autographs, posed for magazine covers, and yes, she sold luggage. But the luggage came second to the lesson. You can be smart, capable, and unapologetically yourself. She was also a pioneer in managing the relationship between celebrity and practicality. She turned public appearances into opportunities to fund flying, carefully timed her tours and interviews, and made sure her fame served her mission, not the other way around. She was a master at turning attention into fuel, literally and figuratively. Meanwhile, she was always planning her next escape. Behind the glamour and headlines, Amelia was still thinking about altitude, speed, and freedom. Every photo op was a paycheck, every interview a platform, and every smile a reminder. She wasn't just an influencer, she was a pioneer, carving the sky for everyone who came after her. Then comes the big one, the world flight. She wants to fly around the world at the equator. 29,000 miles. She's got a Lockheed Electra 10E. It's a beautiful machine, 2 engines, lots of dials, and enough fuel tanks to turn it into a flying bomb. She takes Fred Noonan with her as a navigator. They make it 22,000 miles. They're almost home. They just have to hit one tiny speck in the Pacific, Howland Island. Now let's talk about Howland Island. It's a mile long, in the middle of the biggest ocean on the planet. It's like trying to find a specific grain of sand in a desert while you're wearing sunglasses and riding a motorcycle at 150 miles an hour. And remember, this is 1937. No satellite phone, no Google Maps, just dead reckoning, celestial navigation, and trust that your tiny aircraft won't decide it hates you today. The Coast Guard ship Itasca is waiting there trying to talk to them, but the radio signals are garbage, static interference, and the equivalent of shouting underwater. They can't hear each other. Amelia is screaming into the mic. Noonan is probably checking his watch, calculating positions, and they're running out of gas. Every mile feels longer than the last. Every cloud seems like a threat. They were literally flying by the stars, clouds, and sheer instinct. Noonan, a seasoned navigator, was trying to calculate their location using celestial fixes, essentially doing trigonometry while bouncing in a metal tube that could tip over at any second. Amelia was adjusting controls, monitoring fuel lines, and keeping the Electra level as best she could. Each wave of static over the radio was like being told, "By the way, your safety net is gone." And then, nothing. On July 2nd, 1937, transmissions stopped. What followed wasn't a dramatic reveal or a last message, just silence, nearly a century of it. And that silence has driven people slightly insane. Everyone's got a theory. She was a spy for FDR. The Japanese captured her. She ditched the plane and lived out her days under a new name on a forgotten island. But the most likely answer is also the simplest. They missed Howland Island. They ran out of fuel. The plane went into the Pacific Ocean. And the Pacific is not romantic. It's not forgiving. It's vast, cold, and final. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan died doing exactly what they had always done, pushing limits, trusting skill, and accepting real danger. The mystery isn't what happened. The mystery is why we're so uncomfortable admitting that courage doesn't come with guarantees. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not the disappearance, not the theories, but the resolve to step into the unknown, knowing there may be no way back. Amelia Earhart wasn't trying to break glass ceilings. She was trying to pretend the ceiling didn't exist. She didn't want special treatment. She wanted a fair shot at the same danger the guys were facing. And she didn't just participate in aviation for herself. She showed other women that you can was always more important than you should. Every flight, every record, every column in Cosmopolitan was basically her whispering or screaming depending on the altitude to the world. "Don't tell me what I can't do." She once said, "Precious little expectancy remains that any work will be done well if it is done by a woman." She spent her whole life proving that sentence wrong. She showed that bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's being terrified and getting in the cockpit anyway because the alternative is being a sack of potatoes. And let's be honest, if sack of potatoes isn't the ultimate motivator, I don't know what is. Her life was also a masterclass in smart hustle. She monetized fame without losing credibility. She built a personal brand decades before personal brand was a thing, and she used it to fund her real work, flying, exploring, and inspiring others. She never compromised the core mission, just the packaging. She didn't just inspire female pilots. She inspired every person who's ever been told they're too small, too weak, or too out of place. Bessie Coleman, Jacqueline Cochran, and countless other aviators cite Amelia as a reason they even looked up at planes instead of just admiring them from the ground. So the next time you're stressing about your resume, your title, or whether you're on the right path, think about Amelia Earhart. Picture her staring at an empty horizon, no land in sight, with a fuel gauge that's more hope than science. She didn't organize her life around safety or approval. She organized it around meaning. And in just 40 years, she managed to live more fully than most people do in 100. She didn't just fly a plane. She showed us that the only real limits are the ones we agree to. That courage can be funny, and that sometimes the sky isn't the limit, it's just the starting line.